it's still preparing to live stream right now. All right, you guys are on.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It's, I guess, a minute before 5 o'clock, so I'm gonna delay. I see my clock about to turn. I guess we want to do things promptly here because we know you have so many things on your screen that you could be watching right now, and we're grateful that you're here watching our screen. My name is Eric Kleinenberg. I'm the director of the Institute for Public Knowledge. Welcome. We do a lot of things at the Institute for Public Knowledge during ordinary times, and we like to pride ourselves on being a kind of oasis in the university, a place where people can come and really enjoy each other's personal companionship and intellectual companionship. And we have these spirited evening conversations, especially when a new book comes out or when there's an idea or a project we want to discuss. And they are highlights, all the time of the semester for so many of us. And it's painful, I think, for all of us in the IPK community to not have events like this in person, because there's just nothing like being together at 20 Cooper Square on the 5th floor. But what we've learned over the last several months is there are some advantages of being able to do things remotely, including the great advantage of being able to have all kinds of people who might not ordinarily be able to make it to 20 Cooper show up and join us in conversation. And so if you are an IPK regular, welcome back to this new format. And if you're new to IPK, welcome. We're really happy to have you. And looking forward to the next hour that we're going to spend together. This is an especially nice occasion for us because while we do a lot of book events at IPK, only occasionally do we get to do one with someone who's really a core part of the Institute and our working groups. And as some of you know, for the last several years, we've had a working group on the social challenges of climate change that involves graduate students and faculty from around the Northeast. And we've had a few iterations of projects that bring people together to talk about the environment and activism, social movements, our ideas about the environment, the cultural changes that the climate emergency is forcing us to make, and that we probably need to make anyway. Now it's especially nice to be able to have one of our own core members, Peder Anker, here to talk about his new book. The book, I'm sure you've seen it now, is called The Power of the Periphery: How Norway Became an Environmental Pioneer for the World. And if you look closely, you'll notice that I have found some wallpaper I'm going with Norwegian wood theme to try to get us in the right mood for tonight's conversation. This is a really fascinating book. It's a book about the history of environmental ideas, and it begins with the importation of an American book, Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, into Norway, and tracks the development of a set of ecological ideas that both provide a kind of a vision and a politics for ecological responsibility, but go beyond that as well. It's about the idea that through ecological responsibility, Norway can establish itself as morally decent, as an international leader, as a force for the good. And in this kind of extraordinary study, Peder takes us through several decades of work to show how Norwegians' sense of self and sense of a political identity and sense of a role in the world gets tracked through its ecological politics. It's really fascinating, and I'm eager to hear from him tonight. The book, as many of you know, is published by Cambridge University Press, and it's available as open access. You can get it for free, and maybe we can share that link tonight. It's definitely worth buying, but if it's for sure worth reading, and it's easy to do it. So a few things about Petter. He has been teaching at NYU's Gallatin School. He received his PhD from Harvard in 1999. He's a professor in the history of science. He has also received research fellowships from the Fulbright program, from the Dibner Institute and the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. He is the co-author of Global Design, Elsewhere Envisioned, together with Louise Hartman and Mitchell Joachim from NYU. He's also the author of From Bauhaus to Ecohouse, A History of Ecological Design, which explores the intersection of architecture and ecological science, and also Imperial Ecology, Environmental Order in the British Empire, from 1895 to 1945. The program for tonight is that I've asked Petter to speak to us for about 20-25 minutes. I might have some questions. We're taking questions from you. I believe you can post them to at NYU IPK on Twitter, and then the messages or the questions will come to me, and I will ask Petter. We're gonna to answer them. We're gonna try to go for just about an hour tonight. We're mindful of everyone's time, so we'll end at around 6 o'clock. And Petter, you should know that you have now a credit for an actual toast and celebration at IPK. As soon as the time is right, we will have you in person for a real celebration. But for now, let me pass the Zoom microphone over to you. Welcome to virtual IPK, and congratulations on this terrific book.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you for that generous, overly generous introduction. So that's really super. I'm so proud to be part of the IPK presentation. Also, thank you everyone for zooming in. I know there are people staying up late in Europe, so I hope I can keep you awake. And I know there are early birds in China, so good morning to you. And everyone else, welcome. I will hopefully keep you alive and on the tiptoes for the next 20 minutes or so, after which you should ask me all kinds of good and naughty questions and prove me wrong, hopefully. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see some slides. Let's see. Here we go. Eric, can you confirm that you see this slide now we're on? Hopefully we are.
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, so what you see here is the seed bank in Spitsbergen, built by Norway in 2008. Here is the book, just came out. Emphasize, you can just type in the title and you will find a link very easily, and you can download it completely for free, the entire book. So I don't need to sell it really, because I don't earn money on it, but it's there for you to read or to peek at and search through. All right, let me start with the Seed Vault event. It became a national phenomena. It was everyone, published everywhere. This is where all the seeds from all over the world are being stored. You see here the Jens Stoltenberg, the Prime Minister at the time, hanging around with Wangari Maathai, who is the Nobel Peace Prize winner. And there they were storing all the seeds from around the world. And what's fascinating here is that Norway is like the good people. They are doing this to be the good for the world, and that's sort of the message. We are, or Norway are, these people who protect the environment. I want to start long before the Sea Vault, back at a place called Finse. It's midway between Bergen and Oslo, right up in the mountains. Beautiful scenery, as you see, and you see there's a small little cabin. This was called Garpen, which was the ecological research station that opened in 1965. This is where ecology sort of happened or started in Norway. Yes, it started with some earlier lectures in Oslo, but this is where it was happening. This is where people came together. And my thesis is this, and emphasize thesis because you're going to have a thesis and an argument, is that ecology and environmental thinking in Norway began in the periphery, in places like this, in cottages, in small remote places. And that's where the good people, so to speak, were. That's where the good thinking happened. This is where the right type of knowledge emerged. And after, in this case, investigating the ecological harmony of this place, you would go down to the valleys, down in the to the city, and you can point out everything that was not in harmony. So this was the harmony. Down the city was not. If you want to put methodology to it, it's kind of the Orientalism. This is here, and the Occident down in the city. This research station actually was built to one of Europe's biggest research station, perhaps the world, I don't know. You see it's pretty big, 700 square meters, lots of ecologists. Anyone who's an ecologist in Norway would have spent time here, especially in the summer. This was exciting, this was fun. This is where romances took place, and people would walk around and investigate a landscape which you see is fairly simple, meaning it's less complicated than the forest in the valley. So you could easier kind of learn the ecological connections and see how things were hanging together and compare it to lowland environments. Here you see one ecology, Ivan Östby, who was one of the instigator and prime sort of engines of this place. You see down there in the bottom, you see that's kind of cigar-looking building. That's the research building. Around it, you see a lot of small cottages. And again, the argument here, I mean, that these cottages, and these are cottages for people, that's where people would have sort of a vision of what the environment should be like. In Norwegian, it's called the hytte, the cabin, and that became the good place to go. All right, environmentalism in Norway really started with Rachel Carson. It's hard to find much about environmentalism before 1962, published in 1963 in Norway. This is the Norwegian edition. So kind of that's where I started. And it got like really good reviews, but it was also read by everyone afterwards. So in a way, environmental concerns were kind of brought to Norway from abroad. Then stayed in Norway, and then it was exported, as I will tell in a while. That idea of the periphery, the place out in the mountains, has been actually celebrated in Norway. And here are the three major figure around it. You'll find in the Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl, who went to Fatuhiva, a small island in the Pacific. And that's kind of where his thinking came together. And he will compare Fatuhiva and the nature in harmony there with the disasters around the world. We find a guy called Helge Ingstad, who went to live with the First Nation people in Canada and explore that as a place of harmony and of proper living. And then, which he will then compare to the lack of harmony, if you like, in Norway and the cities and city people. And then finally, Fredrik Barth, who was no environmentalist or activist really, but he was the one who actually introduced ecology in Norway, and they do it through studying ethnic groups in Swat, North Pakistan. A lot of political tensions now in that area. Back then, it was not. Sorry. So this is where, so he was the one introducing this idea of ecology and humans humans being part of ecology, understanding humans through the science of ecology. And that is important because it would establish ecology in Norway as always including human beings, a broad concept of ecology. All right. In the late 60s, the counterculture in Norway, in terms of environmentalism, really started with the architects and the designers at the Oslo School of Architecture, and this became a really important exhibition. It's called "And After Us" or "Etter oss," published, and you can see it was created up. You see it on the upper left corner at the university in the outside university in the center of the city. And you see on the upper right, you kind of see a schematic thing of what is organized. And the basic message is here. You know, there is the ecological harmony of tomorrow. That's what you say on the right, where you see this kind of picturesque landscape where everything is good and people are living in harmony and people are living in this, all the things you consume are returning to nature in a responsible way. That's the kind of vision for tomorrow. And then today we see this kind of mess of pollution and waste, where there's no ecology. And if you notice, we see the garbage bin there. That's exactly where I'm living, actually. So I'm living in the midst of that garbage, although I don't feel it the same way. This was the moment of laughter. I can't hear your laughter. Hopefully you're smiling of that. All right. this exhibition inspired this guy, Sigmund Kvale, to really come together and organize huge demonstrations in Norway. And this centered around this waterfall. It's called Mardula, on the west coast of Norway. Mardula became kind of the periphery where everything should be good, yet it was destroyed by hydro water developments. And here you see more demonstrations. Here you see the philosopher Arnald Ness, though at the time he was only there for a week, and it's a famous photo of him, but he was not a central figure in this demonstration, to be fair to Kvale, who was the guy. Yet it became important to Ness, because now he sort of felt he was part of a big community. He was being accepted as someone of importance, and this was the moment where him came together and said, I need to think about environmental issues seriously. So it was perhaps more important for Ness than for Mardula that he was there. One of the posters there, hippies go home. If you have one, yes, the environmentalist was seen as hippies, and they were asked to go home by many locals. After this, they wondered, okay, what went wrong? We didn't save Mardula River. How can we imagine a better place for the future? And strangely, they being Kvale and Ness, and a guy called Niels Forlund, famous Norwegian thinker at the time and today, they all went to a place called Beding village in Nepal. And Beding is as remote as it gets. This is, I think it took him about 15 days or so of walking to get there with Sherpas carrying stuff, way up in the mountains. And this they saw as the Shangri-La of sustainable living. They were on their knees in terms of how wonderful this was in terms of ecological harmony and living with nature. And they came back from this experience of the periphery of Nepal and said, this is how we need to reorganize Norway. Indeed, this is how we need to reorganize the world. The Beding village became the model for sustainable living. Here we see the three of them, Forlund, Kvale, and Ness in Beding. Ness, of course, with a teacup, because he was drinking tea all the time, and still does. Actually, he did for his whole life. Over the years, I think about 20 or so expeditions or traveling to Beding took place. And here is a guy called Steininger, and he went to study the ethnobotany, how the people in Beding managed to live in harmony with nature through their plants, and he wanted to study that to understand ecological harmony of the place. Yet Steininger, he was uneasy. He was not so sure about actually living in harmony. That became an issue later when Steininger he came back more radicalized. And the back of this was, and here you see, this is actually what Beding was like. This is the Kjeosen, the mountain farm, typical mountain farm in beautiful Norway. And the village of Beding here became a model for how to rethink the Kjeosen and other farms like this in Norway. Here you see where Ness himself actually would write down the inspirations from Beding and the inspirations from how to rethink ecology and use ecological thinking. This is his cabin or small little study up on top of the Hallingskarvet, very close to Finse, where the ecological research was happening. And you see in front there his chair, that's where he will sit. He will look over this amazing environment, and he will think deep about nature, deep about the environment. And that's her kind of the one at least reading of the word deep ecology comes from the spearing of seeing the entire world, or Weltanschauung, as they say in German, from which became his way of kind of seeing himself as small in the large nature, what he called the self with a minor s instead of the self being the big S type of thinking. Anyway, this is where deep ecology kind of emerged. They were mountain climbers. So as they went along in the 70s, they kind of crystallized a vision for the deep versus the shallow, if you like. The Ecological Society, which you see here on the left. On the left, you can see this kind of these kind of A1, A2, A3, A4 plates laying on nature, ruining nature. That's the Industrial Society moving in the background you see the picturesque landscape, and you see actually the waterfall there and the mountain in the back. And right there on the edge, you see demonstrators trying to stop the advancement of Industrial Society. And on the right, you see something similar. You see the picturesque, good sustainable society above and the industrial society below. And the viewers of this will ask, so what do you choose? Where do you want to live? This was during the Cold War. right? In the Cold War, either you're on this side or you're on that side. And environmentalists will be on the green side, which often had a Maoist kind of inspiration to it. This is how this evolved into. Again, whether to build the Alta Kaito-Kaino-Vastrag, which was right in the middle of Sami territory. Whether to do it or not, it was actually built in the end after huge demonstrations that lasted for at least 4 years, if not more. The permit was given in '68. This became the moment where environmentalism and deep ecologists really put a vision for an alternative way of living. Here you see again how the periphery of the valley of the Alta became the norm for what the entire nation should be like, okay? So you see that the periphery becomes the norm for what Oslo should be. Oslo is dirty, is industrialized, needed to sharpen up. The valley, that's the Sami people, the Alta, that's the good, that's where the good is. And the people who have been to Alta and who have protected the Sami, those are the seers of the good who can then come to Oslo and tell what to do. What's interesting here in this kind of juxtaposition is that when people travel abroad, Norway, the entire country, will be the good people, right? Versus the rest of the world will be dirty. Usually one of the biggest civil obedience demonstrations in Norway after the Second World War, if not the biggest one, with demonstrators having to be taken away by the police. In the midst of this is the Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland. Gro Harlem Brundtland was actually not per se an environmentalist. She was very much a feminist. Abortion issue, the right to choose, was very much close to her heart. But she became into politics through being the Minister of the Environmental Affairs, where she, at least for what I've heard, did a really good job in addressing the issue. And she became, in many ways, very concerned about environmentalism through that period. We're now in the mid-70s. Yet she approved of the Alta building of the Alta Dam hydropower project, right, in the Sami people. And the Sami people are absolutely upset about this. They're on hunger strike. It says here, hunger strike, Sami rights on the 7th day. You see those things. This was the equivalent of the civil rights movement in Norway. Sami people has always been oppressed one way or the other, and she, Brundtland, was seen as one of the oppressors. Actually, in many ways, she was one of the oppressors because she approved building a hydro dam in the Alta region. This became kind of an issue for her, or a problem, because I think she would later regret this. But anyway, there she is. And so when the platform with the Alta was built, she was seen as the evil one, if you like, or the one that had not taken ecological concerns for the Sami. Yet she herself was very much of an environmentalist, or saw herself as a lover of the environment. Here she is at her cabin, right? Like most Norwegians, or many Norwegians, spending a vacation or time skiing up in the mountain with her cabin was also part of her life. Probably some of her happiest moments, if I was able to ask her. And she too was definitely one who was sort of loving the environment, if you like, in this way. She was inspired by, or came inspired by, the guy you see to the sort of longish hair to the left. That's Jørgen Randers. She was one of the co-authors of The Limits to Growth, who came to Oslo after 1972 and published his famous book. At the time, he was probably Norway's most famous environmentalist, because his book was a bestseller. Yet he was the one, Ness and many others, labeled as the shallow ecologist, the one who didn't think deep enough about it, because although this book was a brilliant book in many ways, it did not suggest a revolutionary turn towards something else. He was a gradualist, a gradual reform. That's something Brundtland, this woman, thought, that's what I like. She was a leader of the Labour Party and became a prime minister for the Labour Party. And being a part of the Labour Party meant that you have a vision for a better place for workers in the future, and you get it by gradualistic changes over time. So this gradualist approach that Jørgen Randers kind of was close to her heart. Randers, he he went everywhere and presented his paper. He was kind of the spokesperson for many ways for the Limits to Growth report. And this is a picture from one of the more important events. He went to the World Council of the Churches. The World Council of the Churches is kind of the council where all the Protestant leaders meet to figure out all kind of, theological issues. And there he presented the paper on based on the limits to growth. The Christian leaders, here you see them, it's the same conference. I don't know if we're understanding there or not because I can't see them. But these thinkers, they were like very concerned about environmentalists and others going away from the proper thinking, if you like. They were, merging into Buddhism and yoga and all kind of things that were foreign to them. So they wanted to find a language that could engage the environmentalists. And having gone through all their sort of, archival materials and whatnot, I discovered that these are the people who in many ways came up with the word sustainability. And they thought we need to find a non-offending word to the progressive left who are leaving us. And let's, instead of using words like the coming of Christ or the resurrection of Eden or pray for the coming of Jesus and these things which are kind of not appealing to let's instead talk about sustainability or the coming of sustainability. In the future, we will have a more sustainable society. Sustainable society is emerging on this in these theological readings. And then sustainable development being preparing the soul and preparing yourself for that greener future. That is a gradualist approach to the coming of a sustainable society in the future. So this is some of the ideas that Jürgen Randisch, how he was read by his audience at the time, who picked up on the gradualist approach. This is actually what somehow emerged into our common future. So in the common future, you will find that this is the report that in which sustainability and sustainable development is launched to the world, right? Through that gradualist approach. Though none of the theology is there. But it's kind of interesting that there's a Christian Edenic heritage in that report. What's also changing in this report is that this is a report, 1987, where climate change really comes to the forefront. And it's quite early, 1987, to talk about climate change, but it really is there in the forefront. I think there's several reasons for this. Brundtland, for one, for her, ecology was associated with these radical Arnald Ness and deep ecology and Alta and kind of sense of, for her, things that she was not agree with. It was too radical for her. And so ecology was not that attractive to her, as opposed to climatology, which was kind of a new field. But then climatology too would appeal to the patron of the report, which was the United Nations. Imagine the sky is what we have together, right? The land is more complicated from United Nations point of view because that's where all the countries are, but the sky and the air belongs to everyone. So the United Nations would endorse or would think that climate change is something really important that we can bring the world together. This is still during the Cold War. Remember, the Cold War ends in 1989. In this context, or as a result of this, Norway was asked to, or through Brundtland was asked to put up a center for climate research, and they founded Cesaro with his director Ted Hanisch, who was Brundtland's state secretary, very close to the Labour Party, in other words. He, despite it, he could not stand Arnald Ness and the deep ecologies and all that, so just wanted to really keep that on arm's length. And then, even more interestingly, the chairman was Henrik Åge Hansen, and he was the vice president of Statoil. Statoil is called Equinor today. It means state oil, and is really a huge oil company. And his role was to make sure that climate research in Norway would not in no way stop or hinder or put a halt to Norwegian oil exploitation. So embedded in the climate research of Norway was really, one, a gradualist approach to climate issues, not a revolutionary one, and two, the idea of keeping oil and oil production out of the debate. to solve these issues, how to deal with climate versus oil, Brundtland asked Jens Stoltenberg, you see to the right, to be the parliamentary secretary for the Minister of the Environment. Was run by the time by Torbjørn Berntsen, was known as the Slegga, or the slugger, kind of a mover and shaker. I think would be a good American expression within the labor movement. So this is evidence of Brundtland really want to take climate change very seriously, and indeed they did. The title of the book, what's the pioneer country translated, Foregangsland. Norway should be the pioneer country on climate issues. And the aim was put down in 1989 to make Norway to stop have a zero carbon footprint by year 2000. It was a very ambitious goal, right? By this period around 1991, people seen that was a little bit too ambitious, thanks to a series of very harsh anti-climate op-eds in the major newspaper Aftenposten. In Norway, which said, climate research is basically bogus, it's a hoax, etc., etc. Yes, the word hoax was used, and which caused, a change of politics. But also became clear to Stoltenberg, who was a really smart economic guy in economics, that it would be too tough economically to do this goal. Stoltenberg was the leader of the Workers' Youth League, and here we see him and Brundtland at Utøya in 1985. Meaning he was at the time already in 85 seen as an up-and-coming star in the Labour Party and someone who might just be a leader in the future. And indeed, he became a prime minister for Norway for many years. So what to do with the dilemma, the oil versus global warming? Here's Stoltenberg's notes about it. I don't know when it's dated, but it says, in Norwegian here, if you go to the far left, if you take down, if you invest, say, 100 kroner, this is in kroner, to get 1 ton of carbon dioxide less versus 500 kroner, you may get more for 500 kroner than 100 kroner, depending on where you invest it. Basically, it's a scheme for cost effectiveness. So if that's the case, you can get, for 600 kroner, with the same amount of money, you can get more carbon reduced. And he put some meat on the argument here. This is his example. If we invest in solar cells in Burkina Faso, which is very sunny, you get, cost 100 kroner. If you do a similar invest of cutting carbon at the oil platforms, it costs much more. So it's more cost efficient to do, say, 2 solar cells for 200 kroner and you get the same result. Or you can use 600 kroner in Burkina Faso and get lots of carbon reduced. So why don't we do that instead? And indeed, Norway did actually build solar cells in Burkina Faso to prove that this was a serious argument. These type of arguments actually became through Norwegian diplomacy, what would be known as the tradable energy quotas, the TEQs, or clean development mechanism. These are basically ways to trade these type of quota mechanisms. This is all promoted by Jens Stoltenberg, Prime Minister of Norway, and also the Special Envoy on Climate Change for the United Nations for a short period before he became the NATO Secretary, which that's his current job. So, in this material, both from Jens Stoltenberg and from Brundtland and from the environmentalists, when they are abroad, they would always talk about Norway as being the good people on all this. They are the ones who sort of are the Foregangsland, the pioneer country, and everyone should listen. While being at home, there will be more skepticism, of course, but then they will talk about the cottage as being the mountain. That's where things are okay. That's kind of is the structure of the book. Here you see the seed bank up in Spitsbergen. I rushed through 300 pages or so in 15 minutes. Apologies. Now you should ask Eric questions, or you should ask me through Twitter or directly, one way or the other. Thank you so much. Ta-da.
That's great, Petter. Thank you. I know I can hear there's a rousing ovation happening in living rooms around the world. They're getting calls of complaint in China because of the cheering. Hey, let me ask you a question as we're waiting for people to write your questions in, and I believe the best way to do it is via Twitter, but I'll be told if that's not right. While we're waiting, there are a lot of places on Earth where the history of ecological thinking and environmental politics comes through a kind of conservation movement that sanctifies nature, and that presents a vision of nature that's culturally distinctive, as pristine and virtuous and closer to something original or godlike and spiritual, right? In the U.S. we have a tradition from Thoreau and John Muir, and and so we're not alone. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what you see as the distinctive features of the power of the periphery in Norway. How is the Norwegian the development of a kind of Norwegian cultural politics around this idyllic nature different from what you see in other traditions?
So excellent question, and you're perfectly right. In thinkers like Thoreau, or if you go to the national parks, say Yosemite or the Sierra Nevada mountains and so on, you will find these pristine places, or it could be a nature walk closer to a community, which will inspire environmentalists, or has been put up by environmentalists, or through politicians inspired by this, to serve as that sort of sanctuary in which you can compare the rest, right? So you can say, oh, these places are much better, and we can compare ourselves to the Sierra Nevada or the nature place. I think that the difference here, and that is definitely real in American culture. I think the difference between Norway and America is that in Norway is kind of a national sport. It's a majority thing to celebrate the mountains, celebrate the place of the pristine. This had to do with a very practical detail. These places are more available thanks to a politic of making them available through trains or buses or whatnot, having been generous with building permits in these areas. Indeed, there are cottages being built all over Norway now, to the extent that the environment is disappearing, right? It's like the cottages is taking over. So, for instance, in 1970, I found statistics that only 16% of people in Norway had not been on some sort of outdoor life that year. That was mostly elderly people who couldn't get out of the nursery home, if you like. So that's evidence of most of the people in Norway being engaged in this type of outdoor life, and thus that's not the case in Manhattan, where I'm now. And I know Manhattanized people have never left the island and wouldn't think about it. So that's a difference.
Is there a very different tradition in Norway than in, say, Sweden, where I know there's also a kind of love for the cabin, and there's some stunning figures in the early parts of your book where you provide us an account of just how many people in Norway take an escape to the country, to the cabin. It's a big part of national culture, right? To go away. And my impression is that that's similar in Sweden. Maybe Finland and Denmark, it's a little lower. I don't know. But is it, among the Scandinavian countries, is Norway also a real standout here?
Yes, there are similarities, especially in terms of the availability of outdoor space. Though Sweden has much more a forest environment than Norway has, much more a mountainous environment, and that creates a different type of experience of the outside. In Sweden too, the cottages tend to be more of a sort of a village type of environment in which they are clung together in groups. while in Norway they're kind of spread out as much as possible, meaning a very pricey cottage in Norway will be as far away as possible, so to speak. In Sweden, you will find they're more in groups, especially along the coast. So there are differences like that. But if you start comparing with, say, Italy or Spain or other parts of Europe, the Scandinavians will look similar.
Interesting. I think some questions are coming in. There's one other thing that I really wanted to make sure I asked you, which is if you could say something about how this vision of the environment affected Norwegians' urban policies, their kind of attitudes towards the city as a place to live, and their investment in different kinds of urban nature, whether it's parks within the city or other kinds of green spaces. Is the love and appreciation for the non-urban coming at the expense of the urban, as some people think it has in the US, or is there a kind of an effort to inject that kind of virtuousness of the natural world into the urban environment too?
Right. Excellent question, and really relevant and different from Manhattan for sure. In the period I'm thinking of, I'm thinking here on the 70s and 80s, late 60s too, the urban was seen as problematic. It was framed as a sort of a place with no nature and thus a place one should avoid. During the weekend, you will go out. You go in Marka, which is the forests around Oslo. In Bergen, you will go in the mountains. The idea of just hanging around in the city itself to relax. So on a cafe table or go for brunches, as they do here in Manhattan, that would not be a cultural thing in Norway, not until the mid 90s or so. So the urban was seen as a place you got to go to work and then try to get out as quick as you can. Very different from many other places. That's why until very recently, there's been investments in Oslo and other cities in urban infrastructure, especially around the greenery.
Got it. Thank you. Well, we have a couple of questions that have been coming in. The first one comes from one of your former co-authors and our collaborator and colleague, Mitchell Joachim, who asks, can you explain the relationship between ethnobotanists to deep ecology?
Super. So ethnobotanist is a study of how certain cultures, usually indigenous culture, but could also be another specific culture described by anthropologists, how they would use a certain type of green environment, plants in agricultural projects. So that'll be ethnobotany, say the way you study plants. That'll be different from ecologists who will say plants non-touched by humans. That'll be the difference. The ecologist will be more like, let's not touch it. And if you touch it, we need to touch it in a good way, meaning we need to learn through ethnobotany or indigenous groups often how to do it in a non-way. This is often framed as a problem of Western people, Westernized people, not knowing how to engage with the natural worlds. We need to learn from the Sami, from the people in Nepal, and so forth.
So now we're starting to get some more questions from Twitter and YouTube. First from Twitter, Johanna Smith asks, could you please discuss the role of gender in leadership as it pertains to Norway's ecology movement?
Super. So the women would more or less stay away from environmentalism in Norway, or would not be taking leading roles. This is mostly men involved, at least in the writings, and the philosophers, the ecologists, the theologians, and so forth. And my book is more on the history of the science part of it. The feminist activism, which was definitely live and kicking in Norway, were focused much more on the political issues. Though we get in the late 70s or early 80s, we get a few what's called eco-feminists would emerge. Though they were more like lonely souls than an active group. So this is a culture dominated by men, for better or worse, probably for worse.
I'm going to guess for worse. We have a couple questions now about the media. The first comes from Cynthia Davidson, who asks if there's a link between the history you're telling and the recent Norwegian TV series Occupied, which she says feels so timely. And I feel very out of the loop because I don't know about Occupied. So you might have to tell us about this series.
So Occupied is a series in which Norway is being occupied by Russian forces, not through some sort of military coup-like situation, because Norwegians have explored or found out a new, I think it's thallium, some sort of energy that comes from this material that the Russians are in bad need of. What's interesting in this series is that all the good things is happening when the Norwegians are out in nature, meaning the resistance movement often happens out in the forest. That's where they gather together for launching the counterattack against the Soviets, which are always sitting in an office. So that can be a picture of some of the same dynamics. The good is happening in nature. The problematic people are sitting inside an office, and usually a fancy office.
Well, on this theme, someone wants to know if you could say a little bit more about the structure of the media system in Norway. Is there a diversified and public interest media system, or is it more of, they say, a Murdoch style, corporate, unreasonable kind of far-right media?
So in this period, things look different now, but in this period, it's definitely a Murdoch style. The Murdoch is the state. The state owns the national television and the national radio. There are very few, or now, free radios, meaning alternative radios, that arrives later. There are a couple. Their newspapers are privately owned, and they are more independent than the state media. The state media, though, was kind of like BBC in the sense that they wanted to include everyone's point of view. So it's that sense is good media. So the environmentalists actually got a lot of coverage in the state media. More coverage perhaps on environmental issues that is happening today, because in the competitive environment, environmentalists tend to come down on third or fourth place of what's relevant. Though it would be interesting to see if some media historians could look into if that's true or not. My guess is that it's true, but someone could prove me wrong.
You tripped me up for a minute when you said that the public media system was like the Murdoch system. I think what you meant, right, is that it was not a diversified media system, but it wasn't owned by a kind of far right ideologue whose vision was promoting libertarian capitalism.
That's true.
It was a state-run media that ran on the principle of kind of providing a diversity of perspective, but all from within its own office. It was not like there were a million voices out there.
Think BBC.
Yeah.
That's kind of the
and that was the dominant or only national broadcaster.
Yeah.
When did you start to get international television coming into Norway?
Late 90s, I believe. This is far outside my theme, so but that would be my guess.
Okay. Here's a question from Hannah Morris, who asks, I'm wondering if you looked at how Cold War discourses continue to shape climate discourse in Norway today, and also specifically if or how discourses have changed with the New Deal, with the Green New Deal.
Brilliant question. To what extent do we have a continuity from the Cold War, and to what extent is there a change? It's an important question because a lot of the environmental philosophies and thinkings around environment and climate comes from the Cold War period. I think there's a continuity. You find a continuity in distinctions like, are you anthropocentric or biocentric, right? It's as if there's no in between, where you can actually be biocentric but very concerned about humans, type of or stand. That's not okay. So that's an example of the Cold War having continued into current debates, or the way debate is framed. With climate, there is a different story which I haven't published, which goes back to the blowing up of nuclear weaponry, and how that pollution of the atmosphere, that fear of pollution, actually continued with climate change fear. So there is a sense, so there's a continuity in that sense. There's also a change that's happening with climate change, and that is the introduction of the computer. And the computer is really, look, in this period I'm working, nobody had a computer, or very few. With the introduction of the computer, you can start dealing with huge numbers and satellite information, and that's absolutely key to understand the dynamics of climate change. By the way, I take back, of course, there were computers in the 70s, but they were few and very, very expensive, and not strong enough to handle climate data in the way it's being done in the 90s and today. So that's an important change. A good question. Good, we need to think deeper about legacies of Cold War in current environmental debates. I like that question.
One of the things I love about IPK is we always bring great people with great questions, whether we're in person or here on the screen. So some things don't change. Let me ask you, how would you characterize Norway's standing in global environmental politics today? What's the role that Norway occupies in international debates about the climate, and what kind of moral force or symbolic power, if any, does it retain, given where we are now?
Right, good stuff. So when I'm living in New York, I get often these comments about, oh, Norway, that's where everything is good. Norway has socialism with a human face. It's kind of the dream of the green left. Look to Norway. Sanders says it. Many others have expressed this sort of sense that Norway or Scandinavia, they somehow figured it out. And Norwegian politicians and diplomats and so forth, they like that. They like that. They keep that idea alive and confirms it. And then also Norwegians kind of like that idea. I mean, if you hear that you're good, you will say, no, it's like, yeah, I'm good. But that also hinders critical self-reflection, right? And that's one of my worries, is that when you are portrayed as the good one internationally and in environmental debates, then that may hinder yourself in asking some tough questions about what you actually do. And there's a lot of questions to be asked. Norway is a big supporters of building hydropowers around the world. And that's not necessarily friendly to the environment. Norway is using tons of money to stop deforestation in Brazil and others, and that sounds good, except that there is questions about corruptions and how this effectively this money is being used. Norway has been involved in aluminum production in Amazonas, which turned out to be a disaster. And has been a disaster for many, many years, though it kind of resurfaced recently. So the fact that you're portrayed as the good one in international negotiations and all these things may hinder a critical reflection of what Norwegians are doing abroad. And it matters. You say, Norway, what is that? Norway is one of the richest countries in the world, own, 1.3 or 4% of traded shares in the world. That's a lot. That's a lot, right? And that's through the pension fund. So Norway is an agent, especially in the financial markets, and that one has to kind of question its role in.
Well, there's also the fact that much of Norway's wealth comes from oil, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so
Norway, oil-producing country, not very different from Kuwait in its wealth.
So it seems to me like that's kind of a key challenge for, progressives who have a real concern about climate change, that on the one hand, the Scandinavian welfare states are models for a progressive egalitarian society with real public benefits and public goods. But on the other hand, a lot of that is made possible by the accumulation of wealth from oil.
That is true and not true. It's not true in the sense that the social welfare system was there in place before oil wealth came. So the socialist welfare state was operating and might been able to operate without the oil. At the same time, the oil wealth really came in the mid-90s, and it will make Norway a fantastically rich country. One of the problem of taking the money into the society will be you will get inflation. So for that reason, it's being stored abroad for future generations, kind of idea. Instead of storing it in the sea or in the seabed, you store it in bank accounts and in traded shares. The problem here is that Norwegians been reluctant to think through divesting this money from oil and coal and gas, stopping its own oil production. It's unquestionable that Norway needs to stop its oil production. It just needs to stop because of climate change issues. Yet that's a very uncomfortable kind of. I can almost see my Norwegian friend like now gasping for air. It's like, what did you say? You need to stop oil production? That's something which is almost unheard of, saying in a Norwegian debate. Although some radicals do think that way, and I certainly do think that way. So the oil is the kind of the issue that Norway needs to deal with right now, along with the rest of the world.
We just have time for a little bit left, and I wonder, before we close out, if you could tell us, what you're working on now, and how people can learn more about your work if they're interested.
Well, I have a web page, so myname.com. Easy there. You can find everything I've written, and everything is also downloadable for free. I put everything up during COVID so that you can download it on the computer at home. Everything I've written, more or less. And in terms of working on now, I'm working on a new book with a friend of mine, Jimena Canales, on the history of nuclear weaponry. So we will see what that book turns into. It's fun writing with someone else. I haven't done that. Well, I've done it once with architecture friends, and now I'm doing it with a history science friend, and that's good. And then I am working on an article on Ansel Adams, the photographer, and what else? Let's see. Yeah, and I have various other projects going on. So, enough to do.
So
enjoy what I'm doing.
If people want to come down and find a bar outdoors in Greenwich Village tonight to have a celebratory drink with you, where do you tend to go out in Greenwich Village? Where can they find you and get your signature?
Oh, good question, Eric. Where do you find yourself when you have small kids at home?
Okay, so you're going to be hibernating then, I think.
I'm gonna tell small stories to my kid. But though I would love the idea of a beer right now, but tonight I can't because of homeschooling and the rest of it.
Okay, so there's going to be no book signing after the talk tonight, but we're going to do a big celebration when we can all get together in person again.
Do send me a Twitter if you would like to have a beer. I always enjoy meeting new people and old friends to discuss, share interests.
Great. Well, thank you, Petter, for making time to allow us to talk about this book and to celebrate it and dig a little deeper. Please, do get a copy of it, The Power of the Periphery. If you can get a physical copy, terrific. But you really have this great option of just going to the Cambridge site and getting it for free and open access, which is an amazing thing. So we look forward to seeing you at another IPK event. If you're not on the IPK mailing list, please go to our website. Just go to NYU and IPK and Google, and it'll come right up, and sign up for our newsletter, sign up for our mailing list, and you're invited to future events. So I know that you don't have a voice right now, but I know that in your homes you're helping to thank Petter and congratulate him as well. So good night, everyone. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. And do send me a tweet or an email if you have questions or concerns. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good night, everyone.